Coming up on The World Today. The spike in India's COVID-19 cases continues to rise as the country struggles with a shortage of oxygen. U.S. President Joe Biden promises the United States will cut carbon emissions by 50 to 52% below 2005 levels by the end of this decade. Plus, an apology from the UK government in Parliament for failing to properly commemorate the over 300,000 Black and Asian service personnel who died fighting for the British Empire. A warm welcome to the program today. I'm Akaite Afia. We're beginning in India today as the country records the highest one-day tally of new COVID-19 cases anywhere in the world, and its highest number of deaths in 24 hours. It recorded nearly 315,000 cases in the last 24 hours, while deaths rose by 2.104%. Oxygen supply has been a problem as well, with a number of hospitals in the capital, New Delhi, running out entirely.
It has been a hard last few days in New Delhi, where, coupled with a rising number of COVID-19 cases, is a shortage of oxygen. People have been working to boost oxygen supplies. Hospitals across northern and western India, including the capital, have issued notices to say they have only a few hours of medical oxygen required to keep COVID-19 patients alive.
India has witnessed nearly 2 lakh new cases of COVID in the country in the last 24 hours, a very frightening number. And more frightening is the fact that this number is not yet the peak of our cases. The numbers are rising, and it's anybody's guess where this number is going to stop. There are all kinds of activities still happening across the country, which are likely to lead to further increase in these numbers in the coming few days.
Despite the shortage, coronavirus patients continue to flood hospitals. The country has recorded close to 16 million confirmed cases, second only to the United States. The country is in the grip of a second wave, raising more fears about its overwhelmed healthcare system. But unlike last year, when a national lockdown was announced, this time only regions are implementing their own rules. Delhi announced a week-long lockdown at the weekend, leaving just government offices and essential services like hospitals, pharmacies and grocers open. Authorities in the worst affected state of Maharashtra, which was already under partial lockdown, have announced a series of additional restrictions starting from this evening. Uttar Pradesh, which is also reporting a high caseload, has adopted a more conservative approach, with its High Court on Monday ordering a lockdown in 5 badly affected districts. However, it was put on hold after the government appealed against the decision in the Supreme Court. India, which has a population of more than 1 billion people, has so far administered more than 130 million doses of coronavirus vaccines. But the drive has been restricted to health workers, frontline staff, those above the age of 45, and anyone with comorbidities.
Meanwhile, U.S. pharmaceutical company Pfizer says it has identified counterfeit versions of its coronavirus vaccine in Mexico and Poland. Authorities seized the doses in the two countries and confirmed that they were fake. In Mexico, they had false labels, while the substance in Poland was believed to be anti-wrinkle treatment. The World Health Organization has warned that fake vaccines pose a serious risk to global public health and has called for them to be identified and removed from circulation. U.S. President Joe Biden has told leaders attending the Global Climate Summit virtually that the United States will be cutting carbon emissions by 50 to 52% below 2005 levels by the end of this decade. The new target essentially doubles America's previous promise. Americans hope that the ambitious new plan will encourage China, India, and others to go further before the crucial COP26 meeting in Glasgow in November.
By maintaining those investments and putting these people to work, the United States sets out on the road to cut greenhouse gases in half by the end of this decade. That's where we're headed as a nation. And that's what we can do if we take action to build an economy that's not only more prosperous, but healthier, fair, and cleaner for the entire planet. The United States isn't waiting. We are resolving to take action. Not only our federal government, but our cities and our states all across our country. Small businesses, large corporations, American workers in every field. We know just how critically important that is, because scientists tell us that this is the decisive decade. This is the decade we must make decisions that will avoid the worst consequences of the climate crisis. We must try to keep the Earth's temperature and to an increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. You know, the world beyond 1.5 degrees means more frequent and intense fires, floods, droughts, heat waves, and hurricanes, tearing through communities, ripping away lives and livelihoods.
Other leaders attending the summit also had their say. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the country will aim to cut its emissions of greenhouse gases by 40 to 45% from 2005 levels by 2030, up from the current target of 30%. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi stressed the importance of sustainable lifestyle changes to support climate action post-COVID. Turkey's Recep Erdogan called for fair burden sharing to tackle climate change. And finally, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called on the world's political leaders to formulate concrete actions in the fight against climate change.
Mother Nature is not waiting. The past decade was the hottest on record. Dangerous greenhouse gases are at levels not seen in 3 million years. Global temperature has already risen 1.2 Celsius, racing towards the threshold of catastrophe. Meanwhile, we see ever-rising sea levels, scorching temperatures, devastating tropical cyclones, and epic wildfires. We need a green planet, but the world is on red alert. We are at the verge of the abyss. We must make sure the next step is in the right direction. Leaders everywhere must take action. First, by building a global coalition for net zero emissions by mid-century, every country, every region, every city, every company, and every industry. Second, by making this a decade of transformation. All countries, starting with major emitters, should submit new and more ambitious nationally determined contributions for mitigation, adaptation, and finance, laying out actions and policies for the next 10 years aligned with the 2050 net zero pathway. Let us now mobilize political leadership to move ahead together, to overcome climate change, end our war on nature, and build lives of dignity and prosperity for all.
The VOA's White House Bureau Chief Steve Herman joins us now. Steve, welcome to the program.
Pleasure to be here.
So, President Biden's plan to cut greenhouse gas emissions by around 50 to 52% from its 2005 numbers by 2030 is quite ambitious, as it nearly doubles their previous promise. While this decisive decade could result in significantly pushing forward the global climate change agenda in theory, can the government actually can they actually deliver on the promise that they intend to? And what could be the consequences, seeing that it is not the first time that this promise had been made regarding cutting emissions?
Well, the Biden administration is confident that if government and industry get in line, that they can achieve this. Of course, we won't find out perhaps for a number of years. The consequences are obvious in the eyes of climate scientists and regulators that what we're going to see, obviously, is an increase in global warming if these goals aren't met. And there's skepticism on many different sides, in part because what we did not see today is China and India announcing new goals. So even if the United States were to go to carbon neutral or carbon negative, if there are increasing emissions by other major polluters in other parts of the world, then that negates what the United States does. And there's also considerable political pushback from the Republican Party leaders who have a lot of problems with what Joe Biden is proposing.
Well, 40 countries were invited to this summit, and notably Chinese President Xi Jinping will be in attendance. China is the country with the largest CO2 emissions in the world, so do we see any likelihood of China following the lead of the United States to make significant changes in the next 9 years?
Well, we heard some positive rhetoric from Xi Jinping when he addressed the session this morning. He said, for example, that green mountains are gold mountains. So there was a lot of very nice language. But what people here in Washington and in other parts of the world want to see are not only pledges from Beijing, but actually actions to be taken. He is talking about reducing the coal usage, which is obviously a major fossil fuel polluter into the skies over China. But a lot of skepticism and a lot of feelings that China so far is coming up short.
Well, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has praised Biden for hosting this summit, and Europe has now signed its first ever climate law, which includes goals set out by the European Green Deal to make Europe climate neutral by 2050. So what would it take to make that a reality, and could we see that happening in other continents?
Well, Europe has the European Union, which is a cohesive body that can make these sort of binding laws and regulations. We have the Africa Union, of course, but it's obviously not the same as the EU. And there's no such thing as the Asia Union. So it's really going to take a lot of countries to come together, whether it's individual commitments under the UN, the COP26 coming up, or in some types of regional bodies that have some teeth to them to replicate what Europe is doing in other parts of the world.
Right. Well, we do have some time to keep an eye and see how this does play out, but we'll definitely be hoping for the best. Steve, thank you so much for joining us, and happy Earth Day.
My pleasure. Happy Earth Day.
Back here in Nigeria, to mark this year's World Earth Day, the U.S. Embassy's Green Team, led by Ambassador Mary Beth Leonard and Deputy Chief of Mission Kathleen Fitzgibbon, today visited the LEA Primary School in Gwarimpa near the nation's capital, Abuja, to meet the 20 eco-scholars sponsored by the Embassy's recycling program, plant trees, educate the children on the need to recycle, and to donate school supplies and learn about the progress of the Scholars Recycling Program. The Embassy intends to plant 20 trees to represent the 20 eco-scholars sponsored by the Green Stripes Initiative program. Ambassador Leonard said, quote, "There is no greater way to put words into action than to witness the transformation of American recyclables into the bright eyes of Nigerian students. As the United States convenes the Leaders Summit on the Climate Day, we recognize that only together with government, the private sector, and civil society can we succeed in reducing emissions and transitioning to welcome the benefits of climate action, including job creation and innovation." The Green Stripe Initiative focus has been on increasing efforts to recycle paper, glass, cardboard, and plastic. While great strides have been made in this regard, Green Stripe will additionally focus on other tangible areas of impact, such as energy consumption, waste disposal, and water usage. With each step along the way, GSI seeks greater community involvement as we focus on a greener Earth for all. Stay with us, and after the break, this is what's to come. Hong Kong robots are helping children boost their social skills. Stay with us. Welcome back. The European Union says it would not take up an option to buy 100 million additional doses of AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccines, which is included in the current supply contract the EU has with the company. A spokesperson told a news conference that the deadline to exercise the option had already expired, and the EU did not plan to take it up. Here's more in the Global Update.
The EU Commission has ordered 300 million doses from AstraZeneca as part of a contract that included 400 million doses, of which 100 million was optional. The EU says it is considering all options to ensure that AstraZeneca meets its commitment with the EU on delivery of COVID-19 vaccines.
We are looking at all the options which help us to ensure timely delivery of doses.
In the United States, the number of COVID cases has surpassed 31.86 million, while the death toll exceeded 569,000 people. According to the Center for Systems Science and Engineering at Johns Hopkins University, the country's cases had risen to 31,862,080 infections as the national death toll reaches 569,401 fatalities as of Wednesday.
There are countries that are frankly of greater risk than others.
Australia says it will reduce the number of citizens able to return from India and other red zone countries to contain the risk of more virulent strains of COVID-19. The changes affect direct flight from India to Sydney and chartered flight that land in the Northern Territory. Prime Minister Scott Morrison says he would announce in the next 24 hours when the new restrictions would come into place.
We'll be reducing by some 30% the numbers coming through our chartered services in the months ahead. We will also be limiting the departure exceptions for Australians travelling to high-risk countries, and that the one we're nominating at the moment, and there will be others, and we'll be working through that over the course of the next week.
Argentina is facing its worst moment of the COVID pandemic. The country's deaths from the virus neared 60,000 amid a sharp second wave that has forced the country to reimpose some lockdown measures. Argentina, which is rolling out an inoculation program likely around Russia's Sputnik V vaccine, has recorded over 2.7 million COVID-19 cases and has set a series of new daily records for infections in recent weeks.
An apology for the many Black and Asian service personnel who died fighting for the British Empire. That was made by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission after an inquiry it commissioned found hundreds of thousands of mostly African and Middle Eastern casualties from World War I were not commemorated by name or at all. Defense Secretary Ben Wallace told Parliament there could be no doubt that racism played a part in the then Imperial War Graves Commission's decision-making. The CWGC, which was renamed in 1960 to reflect Britain's post-imperial status, works to commemorate those from Commonwealth forces who were killed in the two world wars, and to ensure all those killed were remembered in the same way, with their name engraved either on a headstone over an identified grave or on a memorial to the missing.
There can be no doubt prejudice played a part in some of the Commission's decisions. In some cases, the IWGC assumed that communities of forgotten personnel would not recognise or value individual forms of commemoration. In other cases, they were simply not provided with the names or burial locations. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission and the government both of the time and today, I want to apologise for the failures to live up to their founding principles all those years ago and express deep regret that it has taken so long to rectify the situation.
The U.S. government on Wednesday announced plans to probe the police department in Minneapolis. That caught attention around the country, especially in light of recent police shootings of ordinary citizens, especially wondering why the use of force is usually the first option in a tense situation. Our Washington correspondent, Maria Bird, looks into the probe by the Department of Justice.
Like so many of you, I have closely watched the events in Minnesota.
The U.S. Attorney General says the guilty conviction of Derek Chauvin in the George Floyd trial is not enough.
I am announcing that the Justice Department has opened a civil investigation to determine whether the Minneapolis Police Department engages in a pattern or practice of unconstitutional or unlawful policing. This effort will be staffed by experienced attorneys and other personnel from the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Minnesota. The new civil investigation is separate from and independent of the federal criminal investigation into the death of George Floyd that the Justice Department has previously announced.
The verdict was a sigh of relief for many Americans and a sign of hope for police reform.
I was excited and overwhelmed with joy. But the sad thing is that I immediately started thinking about, well, are they going to get us on the sentencing? Are they going to get us on the appeals later? And I just hope and pray that that does not happen. And, this actually begins the start of change that we want to see.
Police system needs to change. Their cadets and their new officers, they need to go through a good, thorough history of communities, of policing, so they can understand what they're getting involved in. And so I'm glad that the people are seeing that we're no longer going to allow police brutality. We are no longer to sit back and just allow you to shoot and kill our Black brothers and sisters, arrest them illegally, search them illegally. I'm excited for this moment.
The federal probe into the practices of the Minneapolis Police Department is just one step towards sweeping police reform. From Washington, Maria Bird, Channel Television News.
A Hong Kong professor has developed a program using role-playing robots to help children with autism improve their social skills, an initiative that has been adopted by other nonprofit groups and schools. The program, Robot for Autism Behavioral Intervention, is designed for people with autism between the ages of 3 and 18 and aims to help them be more social and to resolve issues such as conflicts and bullying. The robots engage the children with role-playing and verbal interaction. A typical class involves 2 small robots acting out social scenarios, helping the children see the difference between appropriate and unacceptable behavior such as tantrums or screaming.
And slowly count to 10.
These individuals with the autism, they have low motivation interacting with the human beings. And also they have the hypersensitivities to the sensation around the world, for example, the human facial expressions or the human voices. So we use the social robots to teach them the social skills in order to reduce their anxiety and also to make sure that our program is predictable and also structured.
Well, that is all we have for the program today. I'm Akaite Afia. Have a great evening and stay safe.